If you were asked to think about people in history fighting for their rights in the face of adversity, what springs to mind is war, devastation, and bloodshed. This is the most common thing to remember because it has such a high impact to your visceral emotions. Interestingly enough, the influence of non-violent action does not get enough mention, considering it quite literally has the power, and some may argue, have more of an impact to change the world completely. One of this century's most celebrated non-violent activists, Martin Luther King Jr., became the predominant leader in the civil rights movements to stop racial segregation and discrimination in America during the 50s and the 60s. He was a leading spokesperson for non-violent methods of achieving social change. In America, in the nation's capital, on August 28, 1963, King delivered his most revered speech. The speech called not only for Negro rights, but for the rights of all people, and for friendship and unity among all Americans.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
In 1963, Southern states featured separate black and white schools, churches, restrooms, hotels, restaurants, and cemeteries, just to name a few. African Americans were also denied the right to vote. Southern whites could also commit crimes against African American people, including murder, with little or no fear of punishment. King advocated racial equality and fostered non-violent social disruption in the pursuit of equal rights. King spoke "I Have a Dream" to a crowd of 250,000 followers who had rallied from around the nation in a march in Washington, held in front of the Lincoln Memorial. But what exactly is non-violent action? According to Sharp, non-violent action is a term that encompasses dozens of specific methods of protest, non-cooperation, and intervention, in all of which the activists conduct the conflict by doing, or refusing to do, certain things without using physical violence. So in short, it's quite literally doing something with the absence of violence to bring attention to a point or fighting for something. If we take a look at "I Have a Dream" as an example, you can see the protest includes largely disenfranchised populations that are in conflict with an oppressive government. In regards to this particular concept, the strategy is referred to as non-violent struggle, people power, civilian-based defense, or non-violent conflict. King himself believes that non-violent actions are of acts of protest and persuasion, non-cooperation, and non-violent intervention designed to undermine the sources of power in order to bring about change. Non-violent action is a universal phenomenon, as it occurs throughout history and across social and political systems. It is just as present today as it was back then, and we still favour the labour strikes, protest march, and the defiance of governmental authority by groups of people in all parts of the world. McCarthy and Krugler say that history discloses similar actions by people as varied members of the medieval guilds, African American slaves, women, and even on our own turf. The actions that I mentioned before are usually done to influence the source and the outcome for conflict. So non-violent actions are neither passivity, nor a part of institutionalized politics, nor violence. We can use King's speech and the context to understand the power of influence it had in instigating change. Firstly, it is a means of protest, resilience, and intervention. Secondly, non-violent action operates beyond institutionalized means for conducting and settling disputes in a given social or political system. An example of that is non-violent political behaviour, is confined within channels for settling questions and conflicts. Next, if physical violence or material destruction are in the same context, which regularly happen alongside non-violent actions, it is assessed independently because of the means. Finally, it appears in practice in the form of distinctive methods that constitute its discrete and recurrent patterns of behaviour. There are many types of non-violent action, and as Weber and Burroughs state, non-violence is an umbrella term for describing a range of methods for dealing with conflict which share the common principle that physical violence, at least against other people, is not used. Gene Sharp, the best-known writer on non-violent action, has compiled the most comprehensive typology of non-violence. The first dimension, known as the tactical strategic, indicates the depth of analysis, where the aim and the operational timeframe is what activists use. The second dimension, known as the pragmatic ideological, indicates the nature of the commitment to non-violence and the approach to conflict which activists use, which includes the importance attached to the relationship between means and ends and the attitude towards the opponent. Tactical exponents of non-violent action use short to medium-term campaigns in order to achieve a particular goal within an existing social framework. Their aim is to reform. The strategic exponents of non-violent actions are guided by a structural analysis of social relationships and are mainly concerned about the fundamental transformation of society, particularly campaigns, and are conducted with a long-term revolutionary strategy, which is what you would categorise Martin Luther King's speech under. Pragmatic exponents use non-violent action because they believe to be the most effective method available in the circumstance. They view conflict as a relationship between antagonists with incompatible interests. Their goal is to defeat the opponent. Ideological exponents choose non-violent action for ethical reasons and believe in the unity of means and ends. To summarise, the criteria which underpin the two dimensions of non-violent action are itemised below. If we have a look at the table, it's possible to identify the orientation of individual activists and campaigns. For example, a lot of campaigns that have been conducted in Australia fall into the tactical pragmatic category. The Montgomery bus boycott and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech are examples of the tactical ideological category. The Palestinian Intifada falls into the strategic pragmatic category. Gandhi's campaigns, such as the Salt Satyagraha, were in the strategic ideological category. Gandhi protested British rule in India because Britain's Salt Acts prohibited Indians from collecting or selling salt, a staple in the Indian diet. These acts are categorised under a few things, like non-violent protest and persuasion, where symbolic acts of peaceful opposition or persuasion extend beyond verbal expressions. So marches, visuals, pickets, and the use of posters, street theatre, paintings, and protest meetings fall under this. Non-cooperation is the most common kind of non-violent action, where it involves the deliberate withdrawal of cooperation. King's boycott of the buses in the 50s is a good example of this, and within a year the bus system desegregated. Another is non-violent intervention, where there is the disruption or destruction of behavioural patterns, policies, relationships, or institutions, which is what his speech was trying to incite. Things like blockades, fasting, seeking imprisonment and overloading facilities falls under this category. The distinction between violent and non-violent action is that the violence is exclusively bent upon the destruction of the old, and the latter is chiefly concerned with the establishment of something new. King aimed to bring forth peace and forgiveness in the face of extremely unfavourable circumstances in the world, instead of resorting to fighting and creating more devastation. Some would argue that it doesn't work, while others would say that it has a much bigger impact than guns and bloodshed. Non-violence aims to empower the disempowered by providing them with a weapon with which to alter the power relationship. It is by far the strongest weapon, and if it weren't for the likes of Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi, the world may still be suffering in silence today.